there's a balance there too, where in fishing, it's all about putting the game plan together, coming up with objective things where you say, I'm gonna try to do this, this, and this because of X, Y, and Z. But then in the moment, you have to just let it just happen. All right, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna use the lapel mic. I'm trying my best to hide it, but I look so dumb. Oh well. Hey guys, Jack Dice here with Obsessed Fishing, and welcome back to another throwback video of up and coming. This event was another BFL on High Rock Lake, and if you've watched the series before, I've done a number of videos on High Rock, and it's always been high on my list of lakes that I hate. A list of lakes that absolutely kick my butt every time we go. It just seems like there's something about High Rock that always annoys me if you've seen the other videos, in that it's like, it has a lot of things that I think I would like. It's not like super dirty water. You got a lot of docks, which I like shallow cover. It's summertime, but there's, you know, there's some ledges, there's some offshore brush piles. There's a mixture of things that come together to give High Rock a number of dynamics that you should make it a dynamic fishery where you should be able to catch fish doing all kinds of stuff. And the truth is, it just never seems to work out that way. So in 2019, one of the big things that was driving my focus that year was the fact that I was in contention to win Angler of the Year. I had a couple good events to start the year, and I knew if I wanted to, I could make another run at it. And that was absolutely my goal. You know, the Angler of the Year title, at whatever level you fish, to me is just a super accomplishment. It means that all year you were the best angler that year. That objectively you fished better than everybody else for the entire year. And so that's a title that as a competitor I want really badly, and winning it the year before only made me want it more. Something about getting it once, I just wanted to like show that I wasn't a fluke, and I had some things break my way in that AOI the year before. So coming into this year, I really wanted it in 2019. I wanted it bad, I remember that. But the thing was, I knew High Rock was going to be the tipping point, the make or break tournament, where if I didn't do well in that one, there was no hope at winning AOI. And at High Rock, my experience, my track record showed that it was going to be one heck of a mountain to climb. So going into practice, again, I just tried to, like, as best as I could, let the preconceived notions, let all the history go behind me. You know, one of the things that has killed me on High Rock over the few times that I fished it is just that it's summertime, it's late June, and I just want to be offshore. But luckily for me, I had the experience of having the BFL the week prior. Now, if you want to watch that video, it's the last one in this series. And that really helped me, because that was one where going into it, I knew shallow water was supposed to play a lot for how the lake sets up. Evidently, the fish there's just not a lot of deep places, and with the way electronics are now, everybody finds them. I guess that's one of the reasons why offshore just doesn't play it as well as I think it should. But in the end, I couldn't find anything shallow, and I had a really good day out deep practicing for that event the week before. And so that event, I said, I'm just gonna stay deep the whole time. I'm gonna stay deep the whole time. And that resulted in not even catching a limit. I only caught a few fish out deep, and then I scrambled and caught some off the bridge. So going into this practice, I said, I gotta focus on shallow. I gotta try to ignore offshore as best as I can. There were a few things that I tried to factor. I just tried to make it as simple as possible. And that for me meant checking some of the simplest stuff. Check the very obvious points that they're supposed to get on, but also check bridges, check big ramps, check, you know, obvious docks. I wanted to just try to simplify this lake that had confused me so much, and not try to run around so much and try to find all this. I'm like, just do whatever I could in practice to get bites. And one of the biggest keys to that was bridges, is because one of the things that I noticed is that I caught one of my key fish off a bridge. One of the few, well, key fish, it was one of the only fish I caught in the tournament the week before, came off a bridge. I just pulled up on it last minute, and I just made a few casts and caught one. So I focused on those in practice, and I caught another 4-pounder off a bridge. So bridges are just very obvious, and so that's one reason why it's easy to avoid them for me, because you don't want to do what everyone else is doing. It's too obvious. But sometimes you just can't overlook the obvious, and with the way High Rock had been treating me, I needed some obvious fish to be caught. So I fished around the bridges and caught a few, and fished a few very obvious offshore points and caught a few, and then just really tried to make that shallow bite go, and just saw very little results again. And so coming into this tournament on High Rock, I had the experience of the week prior of knowing that if you just dedicate your time offshore, it's gonna be a struggle. I have to find some fish shallow. And I'd had a few bites shallow, a couple off docks. I finally started to get a few bites shallow by just focusing on just targeting the thickest shallow cover that I could, the nasty stuff. Docks with the greatest amount of space and shade under them, those were the areas that I was keying in on, and it seemed like I could get a few bites. But again, the deal with High Rock is not a numbers lake. It is 100% a size lake over a numbers lake, at least in the years that I've been fishing it. You don't get a lot of bites in the day, but your opportunity at catching some 5, 6, and even 7 pounders in June and July is really good. Like for a June fishery, High Rock fish is amazing as far as the weights. But what it doesn't show is that most of those guys are not catching a lot of fish. And I like lakes where you can catch a lot, but it just had to be a different mindset for me for High Rock. I just had to tell myself, you're not gonna get a lot of bites. So do whatever you can, fish whatever you can to get a bite. And if that means fishing the most obvious dock, the most obvious bridge, the most obvious point, do it. You just have to do whatever you can to get a bite. So the BFL starts the next day after practice, and that morning, sometimes the tournament mornings are such a tipping point, you know. There's a balance for me of trying to find a really solid, you have to have some kind of game plan, but you can't be so rigid in it that you get hung up on it, and that bites so many tournament guys. When the plan doesn't go as well as they thought it would, you immediately spin out. But you have to have some kind of game plan, some kind of reference. You have to take into account things that are gonna happen on the water and plan for those so that when they do happen, you're more prepared. But you can't let when those plans go awry, let that become a piece of mental fatigue that wears you down and makes you unfit to compete mentally. So going into every tournament day, I like to have a general idea of what I wanna do, some general areas I wanna fish, but I don't like to plan out my day like, I'm gonna hit this spot at this time, I'm gonna hit this spot. I generally like a starting spot, let that give me a feel of what's gonna happen and let the day flow from there. That's what I like to do. Going into the first start of the morning, I had 3 spots. And I couldn't decide which one to start on. I could run up the lake to a single point where I caught. It was a very obvious little secondary point halfway back in a creek, had some nice rock on it, and I caught a good fish, and I saw a few on the graph, and it was one that was like, this is subtle enough. I'm like, if I get there first thing in the morning, I can maybe catch a fish. And then there were 2 bridges, and both of those bridges I'd had bites on in the past. And I was like, well, but I could just start on a bridge. Again, I'm like, I gotta do what I gotta do to get a bite. And so like all the way up, like I thought about it all the way the night before, didn't sleep well, and then the day of the tournament, we're going to blast off, and I still haven't decided. And as we're running out there, running down the lake the first thing in the morning, I make my split-second gut decision. I'm gonna go start on the bridge. I had a decent enough boat number that I'm like, I'm gonna start on the bridge, and I'm glad I did.
You miss yet?
Don't chill down there.
I ain't sad about it. There we go.
Yay, not skunked.
Good? Good?
Yeah, you can let it go. Thank you, Al. Thank you so much. My goal every morning is not to get skunked. That's the first thing. That's a little bit better one. You can drop the net. Thank you. Thank you. That's better. He's going crazy.
Good?
Yeah, I got it. Thank you.
You're doing a whole lot better than I've ever done.
So right off the bat, when I pull up to the bridge, one of the first things that I noticed, the water was a little bit higher than normal during this tournament on High Rock. I think we must have had some rains in the days that I wasn't there between the last BFL and this one. And so the water had come up, so a lot of boats were having trouble getting under the really low bridges on High Rock. So that was another reason to pick the bridge, is because I knew that if I wanted to go fish up that creek, there were some boats that probably weren't going to be able to get under it, versus this little boat here. It was just, this boat is actually really old. It's kind of heavy for its size, so it's small and it's heavy, so it rides pretty low. So we were able to slide under that bridge at High Rock. But when I got under there, I guess the gates had finally opened, and I noticed when I got up to the corner, I saw that there was little bits of debris were moving or swirling around the corner. Sure enough, that high water, they were finally deciding to suck it down the day of the tournament. There was current going. And I just knew that I thought this is a good recipe to catch some bass. So without further ado, I pull out my drop shot, start firing at the corner, and immediately start getting bit.
I think it's just trying to scare us or something. On the way. Try to get mine how you would. Take it easy.
He's going crazy. It's not me. Under the boat.
Take it down out here, putting my hand up on.
Oh, small, but
That's all right.
that's fine. He's got a cold. He's got a cold hole in him.
Get ready with the net. That's a fish right there.
Make the confident. I like the big stuff.
I let them all day.
Oh, I botched it. Got hung. Caught it. Yeah, pop it off the rock and come back.
That's funny.
Yeah, I need to have you as a co-angler full time.
Well, that's a good fish too. Take it easy. Take it easy. I ain't jabbing at you.
Thank you. He didn't like having a hook in his face.
Good. Careful, careful. Say, don't horse him. Ain't nothing out here putting my hand up on.
I'm giving him time. I just want to keep pressure on him, you know?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Nicely done. Thank you, sir. Thank you, thank you. I appreciate that a lot.
Good job, man.
Appreciate the good luck charm.
What about all that? Working so far.
Well, that's my limit, so.
So I just caught fish after fish after fish, and on a lake where I have just struggled to get a bite, before you know it, I've put a limit in the boat within the first 30 minutes. It was just like one of those blessings from God. Like, here you go, here's the current gonna turn on. I just happened to make, of the split second gut decision, I think I made the right one of where to start, and it ended up paying off big time. Another big key adjustment that I made is that I actually was throwing a drop shot, but I lightened up my drop shot weight substantially. I went to a 1/8 ounce drop shot weight. A lot of times I like to throw a 1/4 ounce, a 3/16 even. I rarely go lighter than that. But the reason I went to a 1/8 was because of the current. And that was actually a little trick I learned from the German anglers when I fished in South Africa for the USA Bass. Talking to the guys afterward, they threw a really light drop shot on this current spot. And I think that light weight allows the current to really wash the bait very naturally over the rocks. And it seemed to make a difference, because my co-angler tied up a drop shot and he threw up there a number of times. He never got a bite. We were both, the boat was pointing, we turned sideways and we both throwing up there. I gave him the same worm I was throwing. It didn't make a difference. It was something about letting that bait wash really naturally over those rocks is what it took to get some extra bites. And having that limit that fast was just an insane blessing. And it was an insane starting point that I knew I could go build on for the rest of the day. So I actually, rather than run all over the lake, I said, well, I'm gonna keep fishing in this creek. I knew another point, a little sharp point. Is again, very obvious, but it's another sharp, little obvious stopping point for those bass moving offshore, that it was in this creek rather than up the lake that I had thought about starting on. And I ran over there and decided to give that a few minutes too.
to him.
Yes. Thank you. You can drop it there.
Put my Carolina rig down there. Good in there, man.
Now I gotta figure out which one's the call. Problem.
So I pull up, pull my drop shot out again, and catch another kicker. Like, I say kicker, it was another good one. It was a good call, and it was a good fish. But once again, the wheels are turning. I'm like, how can I take advantage of this? And those bites want to keep me offshore. And so I think I tried a few other points offshore, but it wasn't happening. And I knew better. At this point, I knew better. I said, I cannot live and die offshore on this lake. I've got to slide shallow. So without further ado, I started sliding over from the same banks offshore where I've been catching a few fish. I slid up to the banks and started skipping some of these docks with a beaver type bait, Texas rigged. And I work my way down this bank, and I get to this one, you get a feel. If you fish docks long enough, you know that there are certain docks that, even if you can't like objectively name the qualities of the dock that make it good, you could just kind of look at it and say, yeah, that's the one. I don't know what it is about years of fishing docks. I've experienced it in numerous tournaments where you're just running down the lake and there's just one dock in a line that makes me pull over and fish it. And usually those are the ones that pan off. So we get to this one dock and it just looks right. And I flip my beaver bait up in there and it starts swimming off, and I catch another good fish that helps me cull up. And there was something about that bite. The dock was, I looked at the contours of the lake, and we had a steep contour, getting flatter, flat, until it was pretty much a flat bank. And that dock was the last one. It was on the flattest part of that stretch of bank. And something about that, you know, bass fishing, pattern fishing, bass fishing in general is all about looking for patterns, looking for figuring out the consistent factors that make bass bite and make bass. It's about figuring out where they are. You got to figure out what makes them bite, but also it's about figuring out the variables of why was that fish there so that you can duplicate it. And that's what pattern fishing is. It's taking a variable and isolating it and saying, that's the variable to key on. This is why fish are living here. Again, it's making these kinds of decisions is really a lot easier with a limit in the box. But I took that and I said, look, I've fished a lot of, you know, my thought process is it's summertime, you want deep water, but that was the shallowest dock in the line. I've got to go try some others. So I look at the map and I see another flat contour on the main river, on the main part of the creek channel, I should say, but it's a flatter contour, a number of docks. I slide over there and start fishing those. And it wasn't long before you know it, I flipped up to another dock post and start swimming off again. I catch another good one to cull up again. And from there, I just started running some flat docks and I just got a number of bites. Some helped me, some didn't, but it was super cool. It was this is like what you dream of as a tournament fisherman. And when guys talk about figuring it out in the tournament versus in practice, that's exactly what happened to me in this tournament, is that I have fished high rock literally for weeks. I've spent weeks on this lake. I say weeks. I spent, you know, a tournament and the year before, I'd practiced for 3 days and then spent the tournament. So that was 3 or 4 days on the lake. And then I'd done it the week prior, spent 2.5 days practicing, or it was a day and a half, I'm sorry. Day and a half practicing plus a day on the lake. Anyway, it adds up to, I've spent a decent amount of time on this lake as like a week of my life has been spent daylight to dark trying to figure out how to catch a bass on this lake, and it never have. And all of a sudden, after all this time, the day of the tournament, it's clicking. It's absolutely clicking. These shallower docks, I've been missing it all along, the flattest, shallowest ones, at least for this day. I think a little bit of that had to do with the fact that current made it a lot better. And these docks, a lot of them were on the ones that were on the main channel of the creek. So I think the shallow water on those docks, I think it allowed the current, something about it versus a deep dock. So I think the shallower docks, it like compressed the water, and I think it just made a little bit more current. I don't know if that was the deal with that day, but whatever it was during the tournament, for that day, it was the right deal. At some point later in the day, the waves got up, the pleasure boaters got out, and that's the thing about summertime tournaments is that's where game plans matter, is because you have to make tactical decisions based on things like, you know, boat wakes. Like when you're fishing a dock that's this deep, you know, literally 2 foot deep, and freaking then, you know, by the afternoon, wakes are, it's slapping up and down, and the water with the waves is going from 1 foot to 2 foot, foot to 2 foot. That's just hard to make, it's hard to trigger bass to bite. So by the time that happened in the afternoon, I had to abandon that pattern, and I think I scrambled around, went back to offshore. I went back to the bridge for a little bit and tried to see if I could cull up there.
Fished up there one time years ago, man. Right? Yeah. Done.
Thank you.
Good.
You might not call.
Thank you.
And I caught a few fish, but throughout the day, but nothing that helps. But all in all, I was thrilled. It was my first ever time I'd caught a limit on High Rock, and not only a limit, but one where I improved throughout the day, and I mixed everything. In a way, it was a junk fishing deal, because I mixed these very obvious pieces of cover in the bridge pilings and the bridge corners, but then I also mixed in some offshore, and then I figured out the shallow dock deal. So it's like, instead of like committing to one thing, I just did everything, and everything worked. So, but it was the key, it was little things, you know, adjusting the drop shot weights, noticing the current, fishing, the timing of fishing docks before they got washed out, realizing it was the shallow ones on the main channel. It was just paying attention and really letting the day come to you. Those are the kind of days that usually end up being the best, where the day just seems to come naturally. You don't have to force some game plan. It just kind of happens. And so to have it happen on High Rock in the event that has kicked my butt year after year, in the event when I needed it to try to make a run at AOI, it meant a lot. I took them back to weigh in, and I ended up in 9th place. And that moved me up to take the lead in Angler of the Year. Exactly what I wanted to do. Somehow it happened. I'm still speechless. Remembering that tournament. It was just it was one of those like thrill of victory tournaments, and they're so rare in fishing, so rare. I mean, a top 10, obviously competitors, you want to win, but for me, that was an absolute monstrous win for me on that lake, where I've literally never caught a limit on it, and now when I'm trying to contend for AOI, I need to have it come together, and it didn't come together in practice. Another 2.5 days of practicing, didn't put anything together, and the day of the tournament it happened. I mean, those are the kind of things you just look up and say, thank you, God. So anyway, guys, that's it. That'll wrap up this up and coming throwback video, running through some of the old content, some of these old tournaments, looking back on what I did to make decisions. And I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you learned something about the decision-making process that it takes to have successful tournaments. I'm still trying to figure it out. And so looking back at these videos and like watching what I did is actually really helpful to me. But the thing is, in fishing, you know, it's a roller coaster of emotion sport. So you have to really take what you can from both the good tournaments and the bad tournaments, and just enjoy the highs and enjoy all the moments that get you there during the lows. I'm still trying to figure out what's the balance between, like, you know, they say a person who enjoys the walk will walk a lot farther than the person who just enjoys the destination. But I think that there's also a balance in that where you have to have goals. So in some ways you have to just let things happen. And that's so true in fishing. And for me, that's part of life, is just kind of, for me, I have to just trust God and let Him be the one who works. But also in fishing and in life, you can't ignore, that doesn't mean you just throw out game plans. It doesn't mean you throw out work ethic. It doesn't mean you throw out hours and hours spent trying to perfect a craft. And so there's a balance there too, where in fishing, it's all about putting the game plan together, coming up with, like, you know, objective things where you say, I'm gonna try to do this, this, and this because of this, X, Y, and Z. but then in the moment you have to just let it just happen. And if it doesn't just happen, you have to be okay with that. I got to see both of those on this lake. High Rock taught me both of those. It gave me the lowest lows and some of the highest highs, and certainly those lows made this high that much sweeter. So thank you guys so much for watching. God bless, tight lines, and I'll see you next time. I'm out.